Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be back here again. Joe, thank you for inviting me. What's special I always find about MacGill is the audience, and the audience gets better. It couldn't have been worse the first time I was here 27 years ago, as in the audience were my 3 daughters, aged 10 to 15, who wanted to be anywhere but here. It did reduce the average age. And the youngest still, when I said, she still remembers it as boring. And the eldest said Seamus Heaney was great and says nothing about me. Anyway, sort of sitting through so many wonderful sessions here this year, it's very much like my school reports, which always said could do better. So that these sessions have been about how we can make Ireland a better place. And at the end of the week, instead of talking about the immediate problems and making things better, I think we need to look forward, and we can look forward in spite of some of the things we've heard with some confidence. The extent to which the way we have dealt with a crisis and come out the other side is something which many doubted when at MacGill's earlier in this decade. We were asked to talk about long-term vision and a plan is required. Now, economists don't do vision. I leave that to Olivia and Brian. But I want to talk about 3 challenges which we face when you look out into the distant future. One, and Don, you talked about a climatic end. I want to talk about climate change and the problem and the challenge which it faces, which really hasn't come up in the week. The second is about evolving our economic strategy to deal with the evolving world we live in. And finally, some demographic challenges and the opportunities that a multicultural economy, which we are, presents to us. In terms of climate change, I just want to say as a disclaimer, I'm chairman of the Climate Change Advisory Council. I'm speaking as John Fitzgerald, not chairman, because on Wednesday we are publishing our periodic report, so I'm not going to break my own embargo. But this is one of the central issues which faces not just Ireland, not just Europe, but the world over the coming decades. And it's very difficult for the political system to deal with, because we must take action for future generations. I'm going to be dead long before the problem hits. This is about my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren, because it's going to be the middle of the century before things get really difficult. So politicians have got to go to the electorate and say, look, you're going to have to make sacrifices today, and we're going to have to spend money, we're going to have raise taxes to change the world, and you are not going to benefit from it. Normally in public policy, you can build a coalition and you try and build coalition of enough people who think they will benefit from a policy that you can get it through. Here you've got to build a coalition of losers and make it work. And it's different in terms of most public policy, because you have to appeal to the people of Ireland, the people of the world, in terms of their moral duty. It's about altruism. It's not about the rhetoric of politics normally. And politicians are not normally happy about being moral arbiters. That is not the language they talk, but if they are to convince the people of Ireland to make a difference, then they have to use different language. They have to stand in a way which many of the criticisms would make it difficult for them to do. It's interesting that the Pope 18 months ago published an encyclical, Laudato Si, and it's very convincing on the ethics, and he is addressing not just a Catholic audience, not just an audience of believers, but he has a very eloquent argument to the people of the world about why we need to change, and we need more arguments like this. The problem, though, about the encyclical is it's pretty bad in the economics. I wanted to set it as an exam question in Trinity, and I wasn't sure how they'd take to having an encyclical on the exam paper in Trinity. I know it's changed, but the problem is that Pope doesn't believe in markets. And if we are to make a change, we have to harness markets. We have to make the economy work for us in terms of changing the world, in terms of decarbonising the economy. And one aspect of that is a higher price of carbon. that when we burn petrol, when we burn coal, when we burn peat, the price has got to be higher. And it's not just because the price that will discourage us from buying, but the much more important is it says to people who have clever ideas that can produce energy without burning carbon, you can make money. And we're seeing in terms of, say, the developments of the car market, where electric cars are probably going to be the cheapest thing to buy within a decade. We need to drive that change, because the alternative is we would have to suffer a huge loss of living standards, which I don't think the people of the world would accept in order to make the change. So we have to drive change through fiscal means, through spending taxpayers' money on research, on a whole range of things. It is going to be expensive, we're going to have to pay, and our great-grandchildren will be the beneficiaries. The EU is crucial to finding a solution on this. If we do something, it's not going to make any difference. So the EU, we are part of driving the EU to make rules, and the Commission, the Council which I'm on, have recommended the government support a particular French proposal in terms of changing EU rules. That we need to develop the EU rules to make us change. And these very often people say, oh, the EU say we must do it. The reason we must do it is because we believe in tackling climate change, and the EU is the method that we will do it. It is EU policy that will help us. Without EU policy, we're going nowhere. And finally, one of the problems about this is if Europe does lots and the rest of the world does nothing, you're not going to deal with climate change. And there are two aspects of this. One, the developing world is not going to take on expensive technology to deal with climate change because they can't afford to. So we have to make the technology to deal with climate change cheaper than the alternative. Electric cars have got to be the cheap option, and we have to, in the developed world, fund that investment. But one thing which is working for us in terms of Asia is that Western altruism is actually assisted by Asian self-interest. And we've seen at the G20, all right, Trump may have dropped out, but everybody else is in on this one. So hopefully the world will begin to take action. The second major challenge I want to talk about is evolving our economic strategy. Since we joined the EU in 1973, there have been a number of key policy issues for Ireland which dominated our behaviour, our coalition building in Europe. Firstly, in the first decade or 15 years, it was the common agricultural policy, and we hid under a French umbrella. Earlier in the week, people talked about how we always relied on the British. The British were a pain in the ass on this one. It was the French who were our coalition partners in developing the common agricultural policy. Towards the end of the 80s, it became the structural funds. And once again, the British were a pain in the ass on this one. It was the Germans who were going to foot the bill, who were the umbrella we hid under. But since the 1990s, for us, the big issue has been corporation tax. And it's hard to get enthusiastic about a tax system in terms of vision for the future. And I think we need to be in a different position in 15 years' time. If the Taoiseach comes back from the summit in some new member state to say, I have once again saved corporation tax, we will have failed. So we have to find a new model. It's not that we're going to drop the current model, but we have to evolve. And the dependence on the corporation tax comes with a risk. It has served us well in the past, but the loopholes in it have hugely damaged our reputation with our friends in Europe. That the opposition, and you can understand the opposition, many people in Ireland feel uncomfortable with the fact that we have provided loopholes whereby American companies have paid no tax anywhere. So we have damaged our reputation, and it was really very unwise of successive Irish governments to allow these loopholes exist. 12.5%, the rate, as long as it's charged and everything, people kind of accept it, and especially in Europe, when they can see goods being produced by real multinationals in Ireland, where they're actually doing some real activity. It's the funny business that has damaged our reputation. And we need friends. And in the Nice, the negotiations of the Nice Treaty, we sacrificed quite a number of issues that Portuguese were leading the charge in terms of interests of small countries. We didn't go along with them and back them because we wanted a protocol on corporation tax. We need to move to a different place. And Patrick Holohan in 2005 used the phrase, winning ourselves off our dependence on the corporation tax regime. Multinational enterprises today are hugely important to us. They produce 15% of real Irish output of employment, so they're important. And they will always be welcome. But we need them to choose Ireland for lots of reasons, not just because of tax. And actually, in the recovery, the bulk of the growth in this economy, and you wouldn't know it from some of the things that were said earlier in the week, it has come from Irish firms. It has not come from multinationals. Multinationals have grown, but each year we've had growth in employment of 40,000 odd, but growth in the multinationals has been 6,000, 7,000, something of that order. So yes, they're important, but we are beginning the process. We have been developing an Irish economy which is vibrant and which is working, and we need to push that. The target, I think, it's not that we will change the corporation tax, because one of the things that came out of one of the sessions earlier in the week was it is the continuity, that we don't change the regime suddenly. So it's not that we're going to change, and we will not be forced to change the actual rate, but it is that there are other reasons, and I'm going to come back to some of the other reasons why people choose to produce goods and services in Ireland. The third challenge that I want to talk about is demographic in nature. In looking at papers in Ireland, and many of publications from the 1930s, 40s and 50s, they talked about the population problem. And it wasn't about birth control. It was about the fact the population was falling, that people were emigrating, there was no future for Ireland. And when you look at that, and as a result of that, when we talked about the demographic pressures on the health system, we have very few old people because they're old in Britain. They emigrated in the 50s, and they're not here to be old. So that's one of the reasons why the health services are having an easy ride at the moment. It's only sort of when, well, I'm old at this stage, but it's only when we begin to, like Joe, put pressure on the health system. Not too much, thankfully. And one of the problems which has been talked about earlier is in 2011, 20% of the population were age 65 and over. By 2046, it's going to be 40% of the working age population. So that means that the tax burden on those who are working will have to double to provide the support, the current level of support in terms of pensions. The amount that's needed for pensions today will have to double the amount in terms of payment for care for elderly. It is one of the problems. We have we've agreed to raise the retirement age. It was raised in 2014 to 66, and it's going to eventually go to 68 in the next decade. But we haven't aligned the compulsory retirement age. It seems bizarre that you're making people retire at 65 who might want to work until 66 and telling them to sign on as unemployed. This makes no sense. And research done in Britain shows that if you raise the retirement age, it saves the state money because you're paying less in pensions. But more important is, if people continue on working, the taxes they pay are more important than the pension that is saved. So that it is keeping people working. Now, not everybody wants to work. And I was very conscious doing some work, and my daughter bought a house, and I said I'd do some work around the house, and I was trying to fix the wires and the lamp and the lights. And I discovered when you're 66 or 67, it's difficult to see with no light with a screwdriver up there. So there are certain jobs, electricians, actually, daughters, from now on, you're going to hire an electrician. So not everybody can do it, but for those of us who are, and as more and more of the elderly population have good education and have worked in a range of jobs which they may keep on going, one of the things we need to do is harness the people in this room. You are all doing interesting things. Some of you are being paid for it. If you are paid more for it, more tax to be paid. So this is one of the challenges in terms of, rather than seeing it as, oh, it's going to be a burden, how can we lighten that burden or even make it rewarding for everybody? Ireland also, the second aspect of demography, which I think makes Ireland very unusual and interesting, is the fact that the labour market is so open, that so many people went, and even in the boom times, between a quarter and a third of young Irish people emigrated. And then you have the inflow of new immigrants into Ireland. And it has transformed Ireland into a multicultural economy. And by accident, so far, it has been a major success. And how can we build on this in terms of future decades? First of all, the role of returning immigrants. The returning immigrants earn 10% more because they've developed skills abroad. They've learned a foreign language. They learned how to think differently. And this is one of the things that transformed the economy. Also, in terms of management, and we've had a further influx of skilled foreigners into Ireland. Most of them, many of them not working in skilled jobs, but most of them better educated than your average Irish person. One of the things looking out into the future, I don't know whether any of you saw the French film L'Auberge Espagnole. It was about a series of Erasmus students in Barcelona, and it was a great, very entertaining film. They cast everybody counter to the cultural stereotyping. So the great lover was a German. The really efficient person was an Englishwoman. But the point was the benefits of cultural diversity. You bring together, and the Erasmus scheme, which is allowing students today from Ireland to study abroad and foreigners to learn how to do things differently. And if you're teaching a university class, you know that having diversity in the class makes the class much more exciting for me and for the students. Erasmus for business actually happened a long time ago. In the 1970s, the multinationals in Ireland were run by foreigners. They were all run by Irish people today, but none of the Irish people today, or very few of them, were recruited in Ireland. If you go to Intel, they've worked for Intel in New Mexico, they've worked for Intel in Israel, they've worked all over the world, and the benefit to Ireland, and they are nearly all Irish people, but the skills in terms of management that we've learned from abroad has helped transform the economy. One area where we haven't had much is Erasmus for public servants. Actually, today, there are French and German civil servants working, a few of them, in the public service on exchange. The problem is finding Irish public servants who can speak the languages to go abroad. Really, we're very close to Scandinavia. It would be great to be able to send Irish civil servants to work in Finland or Sweden, but how many speak Finnish or Swedish? It's a major problem. So one of the things that the EU did, when I joined the Department of Finance in 1972, we were just joining the EU, it transformed the civil service because now you have to perform in Brussels. You have to learn what other people do. And this is something that we need to do more of in the future. Will Ireland continue to attract the best and the brightest? The final thing I want to say on this is, I had to talk about the Celtic Tiger in the late 90s to the Tasmanian Prime Minister. And he asked me, the first question he asked me, what role did Irish music have in the Irish success story? And that rather stumped me. But it actually was a really good question. Because why did so many bright foreigners come to Ireland? Because they thought it was an exciting place to come to. The youth culture of Ireland actually is one of the success stories. Can we build on this? And in terms of the future, rather than corporation tax, I won't say it's all Irish music, but it is making Ireland an attractive place for people from all over the world, including our own children, to work in. That is what will be, I think, the key to a successful economy in the future and will replace corporation tax. Right, in terms of concluding, in a global economy and society, we need friends and we need to build coalitions, and they're going to have to develop further, and that's why the Erasmus for public servants, Erasmus for business, learning how other people do things, not just in the Anglo-centric world, but looking beyond it, is hugely important. Like the populism debate should have discussed populism in Finland, Sweden, and Denmark, countries like us, liberal democracies, who have made mistakes, who have not managed the multicultural economy quite as well as we have, but we need to learn what not to do. Bad experiences, the second thing is, before the EU, I put away all the files in Ireland's negotiations with the rest of the world on economic matters when I joined the Department of Finance in '72, and it was a sorry sight. Going to London as a mendicant begging for access. We're in a different world, we're not going back there. I've mentioned the need to reduce our dependence on corporation tax and find other attractions, which are already there, and we're doing it already. This is something that is evolving. It's a work in progress. And building on the multicultural economy. I think that is something that is an Irish success story. We could get it wrong in the future, but we need to build on the success that we've made. And finally, we need a vision that goes beyond an economy, and that's not for an economist, that's for the next speaker. Thank you very much.